Powered by Riverside FM.
Welcome to Do Good Work Podcast, hosted by Terrell Strayhorn and Jaquan Johnson. We specialize in taking a deep dive into issues that truly matter. Each episode unpacks the challenges and opportunities facing today's leaders, from classrooms to boardrooms, offering insights that inspire real change. By redefining success, we're changing lives, empowering people everywhere to create environments where everyone feels a sense of belonging, whether at home, work, or school. So hey, sit back, relax, grab your favorite beverage, and join us as we explore the issues shaping our futures, one meaningful conversation at a time. Let's go!
Welcome back to another episode of Do Good Work Podcast. So delighted for each and every one of you to join us here for tonight's important conversation. And do we have a great conversation in store for you? But before we get into that and we introduce our wonderful, incredible guests this morning or afternoon or evening or wherever you are in the world, I'm Terrell Strayhorn, your co-host. Looking forward to tonight's conversation, joined by my co-host,
Jaquan Johnson. Good to see you all again. Usually we do this on Saturday night, and today is Tuesday. So it's gonna be interesting to talk about some of the things we have on the agenda.
Every now and again, you just got to go live. I don't know, to all the TikTok folk who are out there, y'all know what it's like. Sometimes you just got to hit live and just go. And so there's enough to talk about and enough going on that we thought, why wait? I mean, you really can't now because there'll be new news tomorrow. And in fact, there's already new news right before we even got to tonight's live. We're going to talk about it all in just a moment. But before we go there, do us a favor. For all of you who are watching, tuning in, we're going live on every major platform, Spotify, on Facebook, on X, on LinkedIn, and Instagram. So do us a favor, like and share. Click like, share, tag, post, tag people into it. Add some hashtags to the thread so we can get into the major conversations that are happening. And so just take a moment and find us at Do Good Work on all things social media. And if you don't mind going ahead, liking, sharing, so that we can make sure that everyone who wants to be a part of this conversation can be a part of this conversation tonight. All right. So clearly, if you saw the flyer from earlier, let's see if I can even do this. I haven't done this yet, so I'm going to try something new. I want to share our flyer because so much of what we want to talk about tonight is really based on recent executive orders and other decisions that have made. They're impacting people all over right now. So this was the flyer. I don't know if it shows. Hopefully it will for you all.
Looks good.
So tonight's conversation, we're going to talk about executive orders, the pending now federal freeze in funding, and ultimately how this impacts sense of belonging and the notion of sense of belonging for folks in America, because I think that there's a really powerful message that can be sent through some of this, and we have to be mindful of it. So again, like, share, tag people in. If you've got colleagues or friends who you think want to witness this, get them in here. All right, so you got time, and we've got the right speakers for the evening. So without further ado, we're going to introduce to some and present to others dynamic panelists and speakers who will join us in tonight's conversation. And we want to thank you for joining us. And if you are on any of the platforms, please feel free to use the chat to share, to put a comment, anything that we see. All right, I see. We're going to share on screen. Thank you. Thank you. Somebody else want to go ahead and put us out there? Put something in the chat, and we're going to share anything you share that's appropriate. Y'all appropriate stuff, but we're going to share it. But without further ado, I'm going to go right in the order that's shown on my screen. I am so thrilled. I know Jaquin is too. We are so thrilled to have with us our dynamic panelists tonight, and one who we actually were talking with this summer about a project. We are delighted to have with us Steve Anderson. Steve, we're going to let you introduce yourself to everyone. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you bring to tonight's conversation.
All right. So my name is Steve Anderson. I actually am from Cincinnati, Ohio, but currently working at my alma mater, Tusculum University. I actually work within student support services. So it's a federal funded grant program. And what I'm trying to bring to the table tonight is just really to kind of have a hard conversation about, federal grant programs and where they may lie. And also what is it impacting, in other programs as well too. So here to have a nice discussion, and really we can hopefully get some things solved.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. And we're going to talk about it because you've already heard it, friends, that part of what Steve's going to be able to speak to us about is, as a person who works in student services, student support services that are largely funded, supported through federal grants, what a freeze might mean, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of the impact on students everywhere, at his alma mater, at my institution, at all institutions. We're going to talk about it. And thank you again, Steve, for being here. And we are joined by the president, CEO of Black Educators Rock, Inc. I call her my big sister. And she is dynamic, and you will see exactly why. Dr. Melissa Chester is here. Dr. Chester, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you bring to tonight's conversation.
So I am Dr. Melissa Chester. As he stated, I am a former college professor, taught on the collegiate level for about 15 years before I transitioned into real estate in 2016. I am a broker owner. I own my own real estate brokerage. I have about 38 agents. I also have a real estate school. I did that. That's my job that pays me so that I can fund my passion, which is my nonprofit, Black Educators Rock, which is a national member nonprofit. We are all over the country. We host an annual professional development conference every summer for Black educators and those teaching Black children. And so when we say educators, we're talking about superintendents, principals, teachers, librarians, counselors, those who are about the work. We focus on changing the attitude gap, because we know the achievement gap is simply about the attitude gap. It's the mindset that educators, parents, community members, and students have that is the barrier to achievement. And so that is our primary focus. We have 3 areas of focus when we have our conferences: instructional strategies and practices, professional knowledge, and advocacy and empowerment. And so we're getting ready for our 10th annual conference this summer. Thankfully, we don't get any federal funding, but it does impact us because, as I stated, the name is Black Educators Rock. We already know, like, some of the orders about DE&I, so schools being able to fund the conference, the attendance of professional development when it comes to DE&I. And so that is how it's going to impact me personally. There are other, of course, again, I'm from higher ed, and so I have some experience in that as well. And so I think it'll be a robust conversation. I'm excited to lend my voice to it.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Chester, for being here, and to each and every one. So we're going to get into this a bit. If you're watching, tuning in, listening in, no doubt you likely are aware that in just the first week of our new administration, already there have been several federal actions that have been sort of unprecedented, both in the pace and the swiftness with which these decisions have been made and implemented, but also the sort of broad swath of impact that they can hold. Many of them we trace back to some executive orders. So we want to talk a little bit about the executive orders. We want to talk most recently about the move to issue a federal freeze. And then we want to talk about how it sort of impacts our work. So Jaquin, which one of the executive orders would you like to kick us off and just review for folks who may not be aware?
Yeah. I mean, you guys already touched on it, but what I read recently was the federal funding freeze, which is a temporary pause on all federal financial assistance programs, including grants and loans. And we know that that is going to have a major impact on so many individuals who rely on these grants and loans to access higher education, go to conferences for additional training. It impacts after school programs, financial aid programs such as work studies, scholarships, and most importantly, something that I'm very passionate about that I think it will negatively impact is first gen, low income, and international students. So with that information, Steve, I know that you work with the TRIO program at your institution. What are your thoughts about this?
So at this present time, I mean, we got hit with a brick this morning. So it was something we weren't expecting, but at the same time we were expecting. We just didn't know when it was going to happen. But right now, there was like you said, a federal freeze that was due to be paused at 5 p.m. today. So it's very difficult because we're at the end of our cycle. So the money has already been dispersed, and they want us to pause money that's already been dispersed, which if you know, you can't stop what the law has already done. So, if you know much about executive orders, if it violates federal laws, then it can be contested, in which at this present time, I just learned not so long ago that a federal judge has already temporarily blocked the federal freeze, but it still, holds a lot of weight in people's minds. I think, just sitting back and like you young guys are doing, you're reading, you're informing yourselves. Me, I'm kind of on the front lines as first gen income eligible students with disabilities. And that's another thing that we don't talk about is students with disabilities. They're going to lose funding as well too. Especially me being a former teacher, taught for 14 years in Cincinnati, Ohio. You're talking about IEPs and 504s where those students are going to lose, funding for those kind of programs that are going to help those kids be included in the classes versus being separated from their peers. But from a college standpoint, we use those federal funds to make sure students have all kinds of resources. We help students with advising. We help students with grant aid, where we help them with any balances they may have. We have a mentoring program built inside of our SSS program. And you were actually one of my mentors when I first got on into Student Sports Services, Jaquin. And we're still going strong. Still have 100% graduation rate with our mentors. So it's a great opportunity for students to be able to build themselves in leadership. But also students, when we want to travel to graduate schools and get an opportunity for students to learn more about other schools that are available to them and not just Tusculum University. And what we're trying to do is be able to have those kind of resources so that students can kind of broaden their horizons and think about other things. We have a young lady right now, not just in Student Sports Services, but she's a McNair scholar. So, she's getting a double whammy. She's, trying to learn more about graduate research, but at the same time, where are these resources going to come from? So we're trying to really find different ways to really continue to maximize the resources that we have with our students. And I just talked a little bit about Student Sports Services, but it's definitely a situation where we are continuing to learn more and more, but at the same time, we're going to continue what we're doing. We're going to be there. Student advocates going to continue to make sure that they have the resources that we can make available to them.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest thing that you shared, and, that's the kind of the heart of your message is students depend on these types of funding to ensure that they are
Mhm.
successful in school. There are some students who come to our campuses with low income, no income, and need additional support. As you mentioned earlier, students with disabilities, and that's something that is near and dear to my heart. Is that this funding not only helps them get the resources, but mental health, right?
Yes.
And if we are stripping them from some of these services that they need in order
Right.
to thrive and succeed, it's only going to exacerbate the issue. I
Yes.
think it's also going to impact, enrollment too, right? Because there are
Most
so many
definitely.
students that we're recruiting, and we talk about we want
Yes.
more diversity on campus. Come on, somebody, that they need funding to go to school.
I mean, but I mean, who is saying that we want more diversity? I guess that's just it. What we've learned is that we actually don't want more diversity. I'm
Right.
just talking about students, but my auntie, my mother's sister is a she's a foster grandparent. She does this program for the Easter Seals, and so she texted me this evening. Was like, "Well, you told me not to come back tomorrow. All the funds are frozen." And so, I mean, this is impacting seniors, Meals on
Hmm.
Wheels. I mean, it's so much more far reaching than just the classroom. To
Yes.
the higher ed, I mean, it's K-12. It's literally impacting almost every facet of our lives, whether people
Yes.
realize it or not. And so it's gonna get so much worse before it gets better. I'm in a program called Leadership Jacksonville. They have leadership whatever all across the country, leadership Atlanta, leadership New York, leadership. And so, many of my classmates are CEOs of nonprofits, and everyone's afraid because people
Hmm.
know what's coming, what's next. Where, to your point, Steve, many people are saying, hey, we're going to just do what we can with what we have for now. Many of the nonprofits are like, we're taking donations, but they're not necessarily stopping the work right now. But if
Yeah.
you dive into those orders, I mean, I don't know if someone read, but he literally, like, when it came to the DEI stuff, he literally said in his memo about and don't and asking people to encourage to report those who are still trying to fund those by being
Hmm.
creative with what they call it. I mean, when I say this is like, what he's saying is, hey, don't try to call diversity by any other name and try to still fund it. So we have to understand how significant this is. Unfortunately, so I mean, look at what they're doing with ICE going into the schools,
Hmm.
snatch children out of school settings. I mean, I have educators who are talking about it in our groups and in our chats and just talking about how ICE showed up today,
Right.
trying to get in to take students. Like this is it's just so messed up, and I mean it's amazing. And to your point, Terrell, it's only been 1 week. This is what
Yeah.
we're looking at in just 7 days, y'all. 7.
It's definitely shock and awe. It's definitely a situation where they're going to show you the chaos first before the one thing I always think about, and I love the fact that getting able to know Jaquan and Jarrell a bit more. One thing they do great research, and the one thing that I think that we need to think about is what is the smoke and mirrors. You know, you see the brashness up front, but also what's going on behind the scenes. You know, that's something we need to be thinking about because we can keep complaining about the problem, but what is the real situation? What is the real thing that they're really thinking about? I mean, we don't want to have the conspiracy theorist kind of situation, but at the same time, everything is about money. I mean, how they're going to use it, when they're going to use it, who they're using it for. You know, my thing is if, one thing that he ran on was, he praised people being uneducated. So what's the one thing you can do? I can control the resources that you have in colleges, control the loans that's being dispersed, and then you can't go to college. Okay, so now you got to go and be uneducated and be like the rest of those who voted for me. You know, so one thing we got to think about is, our education system. is ancient. And we have to start thinking about what can we do to enhance our education system in order to get it to where it's supposed to be, in the 21st century, maybe, But what we need to start thinking about is, what can we do now? And the one thing that we can do now is just continue doing the hard work, the hard lifting, making sure these students, I'm going to a conference in New Orleans at the end of this week. Yes, everything's already done and paid for, but at the same time, what if it wasn't? I'm presenting at this conference. I have coworkers that are presenting at this conference. It really puts us in a bind, because if we didn't have things in order, we will have to cancel everything. So now that's plane tickets being canceled, hotels being canceled, you got cancellation fees, and that's just for the workers. And then you got to think about, it's the end of the month. How do you get paid? You can't be paid if everything's on a freeze. It, like Dr. Chester said, it's affecting everyone. But what can we do? My thing is, this is where we all have to dig in and help each other. Me helping Dr. Chester, helping Terrell, helping Jaquin. How can we help each other and then expand that help out to others?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a couple of things immediately come to mind. One is, and you sort of alluded to some of this, the things that we can do. I think one important thing that we all can do, whether we're in this room or watching across any of the platforms, is, first we got to be dealing with accurate information.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think there are also, having read and dissected the executive orders, you can miss a lot if you sort of skim through these relatively broad, all-inclusive, but very pointed and directed executive orders and other documents, right? And so one thing that I think that we've already seen happen that will likely shape what will happen in the world tomorrow and the next day is, while the executive orders and memos are broad, they're not very specific.
Right.
So they can tell us that there's a halt on federal assistance, but exactly which programs and exactly how long the pause would last, none of that spelled out. And of course, the challenge with that then means it's open to interpretation.
Yep.
And for heavy, large, wealthy organizations that have lawyers on deck, they'll be able to rip through this and protect some of their interests. For those that are more vulnerable, smaller, women-owned, minority-owned, nonprofit that serve the community, especially those that, even faith-based organizations that receive some federal dollars, this move will put all of them in a even more precarious situation where, for fear of litigation, I'm worried that people won't do what they can do.
Right.
So you're exactly right. You know what? Maybe you could travel. Maybe we could hire. Maybe we could announce. But because we don't know and we don't have the resources to figure that out right now, we're going to await clarity, which means we're not going to do anything. And right now, the judge has stayed the federal assistance freeze until February 3rd. That's not very long. I mean, just gives us a couple more days to think about this. But we've got to think about how decisions get made in the political branch. And right now we've got a lot of folks who support a particular agenda and a particular direction, who are not just in, federal, state, and local government. They also sit on the courts, even the most Supreme Court of our land. So I think we have to think about this. So before we go into more, since Jaquin mentioned the federal freeze, I think you're exactly right, both you and Melissa, Dr. Chester, that we have to think about what does that mean for all of our organizations and the communities and the families and the students and people that we serve. I think the second thing we should also try to do is help people see some connections here. What federal assistance programs are included. So if you watch the press conference today, the press secretary, was asked, well, what about Medicaid? And she came back and said, Medicare will not be impacted. That's a very semantic move.
Yeah.
So you ask about Medicaid, but you hear about Medicare. It still leaves Medicaid as an open question, right?
Right.
And then she came back and often said, no federal assistance that goes directly to people will be impacted. It's also a footnote in the memo that we're not talking about Medicare. We're not talking about Social Security benefits. These will not be impacted by the pause. She even named those in the press conference. But let's, for a moment, for all of the listening audience, and I'm going to come to this both as a researcher, but as a former public school teacher in a Title I school, I want to talk about some things that I do know go directly to students, but they're flow through institutions, right? So one, let's talk about the fact that in my elementary school in Prince George's County, Maryland, most of our kids depended on free and reduced lunch and breakfast programs.
Yeah.
They do not go directly to the kids. They go to the school. But then those resources, those dollars are used to provide lunch and free and reduced lunch. And so that would be a program that would be impacted by a pause. And again, the students who benefit from free and reduced lunch are not of a particular and a single race, but it does disproportionately help those who are low income, no income, who live in urban and rural contexts. So we got to think about this, that's one of the connections I see there. The second I see is certainly with our Head Start program, which is such a, turning back of the time, because Head Start, by definition, by name, was starting to give kids a head start. And so now we are going to witness that would be a program where those dollars could be paused. What that means is people who work in Head Start programs would struggle to make payroll. People who are running Head Start programs would have to scale back and pause or stop the programming and the instruction that's a part of those programs, which means
the materials.
Come on, the materials. And then along with that, it means that the students who benefit from this, was designed to give them a head start, will automatically be left behind. And especially if we don't know exactly how long this pause is to last. So I think that's another one. I'll just mention another one because I know that it comes to my mind. There are lots of single moms, single dads all across the country. And there are SNAP benefits. I heard from you, Dr. Chesters. I'll let you also comment on that. But also, there are state grants for childcare that give states money that they can give to institutions. Many of them can be schools, but some nonprofits and churches benefit from these. Faith organizations benefit from these grants. Those grants would be paused. And so that means that for some period of time, it may reduce the availability of childcare for those who need it most. Dr. Chester, do you want to say something about?
No, I was just saying, there are just so many different things. I understand it when I say it's so far reaching, it's just, like I said, I mentioned the Easter Seals earlier, the foster grandparent program, it's senior Meals on Wheels. It's so many different things that are impacted by this executive order of freezing federal funds and grants and disbursements, etc. It's just, I don't know. It seems that, America may have bitten off their nose to spite their face. And it definitely has been counterproductive as to what's going on. It's so much going on at once, Dr. Terrell, that we just don't know. When we're saying, those of us who are in these spaces, for fear of losing jobs, for fear of losing funding, what are we going to be willing to put on the line and willing to do? You kind of alluded to that. Like, is it just we're gonna come to this stalemate and it's like, okay, let's just not do anything? I made the comment, well, gosh, I guess I got to change my name to Urban Educators Rock now, because now a school will say, well, no, we can't pay for professional development to Black educators. The word Black is in there. And it's going to frighten them from attending the Rock conference. Even though the conference is the Rock conference, the checks are made out to Black Educators Rock. I'm very cognizant of that. So how does that impact, just them, like Jaquin said earlier, their education, their professional development. They're seeking more knowledge and information. It's just, I mean, it's so far reaching, and it's just, and Stephen alluded to this. What we must do is stop being so reactive and be proactive. What happens is the banana in the tailpipe analogy, they're putting all this in front of us because so much is going on behind the scenes. Like I was telling someone, they had this overemphasis on these fires, and then all of a sudden it just stopped,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there were other things working in the background that were far more pressing with this government than the fires. And so once it
Mm-hmm.
okay, everyone's attention is diverted from what's going on to now we're just reacting. We got to dive into these documents. You have to start taking more proactive measures on things, and we have to figure some stuff out as a country, because it's impacting everyone. When people thought it would just only impact the immigrants and the
Mm-hmm.
poor and the minorities, it's now impacting far more people than people originally thought.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think before we move on to another one of these executive orders, there's mention of what's expected of the agencies during this pause, that even if it is sort of delayed or stalled until the third, if it comes into fruition, then um, that one, you know, any agency that is sort of a federal agency that provides funds to folks directly or indirectly, that they must first pause, stop all of that, and in the interim, to conduct a comprehensive analysis, don't know how that's defined, but a comprehensive analysis of the federal financial assistance programs to identify which ones are sort of in conflict with the president's executive orders. And that during this temporary pause, all activities that may be implicated must be stalled and must then be sort of reported. Now, this would include
Mm-hmm.
and is not limited to anything that has to do with financial aid or assistance to foreign aid, non-governmental organizations, diversity, equity, inclusion, woke gender ideology, the Green New Deal, which, by the way, also means that any of the grants from the Environmental Protection Agency
Yep.
that go to states to help ensure clean water could very well be paused and maybe even removed or terminated, because the memo also goes on to say that at some point what the administration would do is figure out a proper use for these funds that were illegally used under the previous administration. That's the language from the memo, not mine. And that in the meantime, while they're doing this comprehensive analysis, they must also cease any of their RFPs, with these notice of funding opportunities. So no new grants can be announced. Any pending awards must be canceled, and any existing awards that are in conflict with this order must be canceled as well. And then finally, they close out with saying, they're asking the federal agencies to sort of assign responsibility and oversight to a senior political appointee to be sure that they're not only withdrawing announcements of grants that have been published. This is the part I almost fell on the floor. They also want the unpublished announcements. So the ones that are on your computer, that are in your file, that you've been talking about and meeting about, to cancel those as well. And so I think it's broad, it's far reaching. I think, I'll leave it to those who have legal training and the lawyers and the attorneys to vet, whether or not it is even legal in its form. Also, whether or not it encroaches upon some of our civil rights as citizens of the United States, right? I think that's an important question to just park and for people to consider. I'm not telling people what to think. I'm just saying these are the kinds of questions we should be thinking. But certainly in the interim, let's talk about it, right? We've got Title I schools that depend on these funds. We have minority serving institutions, especially historically Black colleges and universities, and Hispanic serving institutions that depend greatly on these funds. Jaquin and I was talking earlier. I was saying, I'm hoping that to anyone who works in enrollment management, to the extent that this freeze takes place and persists for some time, that when students apply to college, we're mindful and we remember this moment, because that means that students who are benefiting from TRIO programs, Upward Bound and the like, would not have access to those in the same way before. And even if some can, the availability of those grant dollars to go and do the work they've been doing impacts students directly. No, I know, not like from the dollar straight to their hand, but through the institutions and the offices that run those programs. And so I've sat at tables too many times where people will look at a student's application to college and say, oh man, they don't have certain kinds of experiences. Or they had those experiences, but they didn't persist in them for 2 or 3 years. They look for the continuity of experience. Well, these executive actions are disruptive, not just to the flow of American life, but also to the students and the institutions and the teachers and the employees and the personnel. Jaquin?
My goodness, I'm just sitting here thinking how just disheartening it is to, when I read the executive order, I was honestly thinking about, one, how they're requiring organizations to submit a comprehensive analysis. Where we said earlier that this is going to severely impact the most minority owned and others who have a lack of resources. So what they're doing is pretty much inundating and overwhelming them because they don't have the capacity and the team to kind of overcome what's in front of them. Second is this seems like it's targeting our most vulnerable populations. This is a direct attack, and saying it legally, right? And I think through our research, we always talk about belonging, and the first ban is air, food, water, shelter, sleep, basic human needs. We can't even meet their basic human needs. You have students going to school, and many of them go to school just to have a meal.
Yeah.
And then we expect them to learn. There are families out there who have, housing insecurities. And without the funding, what happens to them? So I think
When you think about it, Section 8, right? Section 8 offers rental assistance to people. And again, it's not direct dollar out of the government's hand into a person's hand, but it gets to the renter through state agencies and other groups. So there's another one where, the pause would disproportionately impact them. And to your point, you're talking about people not being able to eat, not be able to find a place to lay their head, not be able to pay for their housing. So talk about affordable housing that we've worked so hard in this country to offer more and more options for people. That's undone. And the problem with that is, central to the conversation tonight, is it's hard to feel like you belong. Now, typically we're talking about schools and colleges and those spaces, but it's hard to feel like you belong even in a country, in a nation.
Let me
Where
tell you what's so hilarious about this, though, is that this is to stop wasteful government spending. But the thing that's missed is the government spending are our tax dollars. The very dollars that they're saying that are being wasted are the dollars that hard-working Americans. This isn't money that's not coming out of any of their pockets. This is money that the middle class, who carries the heaviest burden, right? It's our dollars. So you're talking about wasteful spending of our dollars on us.
Yeah.
Is what you all are going to see, because it's not the billionaires that he has overseeing any of this. None of their interests are being impacted at all. It's so contradictory. It's hilarious, right?
That's such a good point, Dr. Chester, because if we put the link in the chat, you feel free, Google it. It's this one in particular is the memo for heads of executive departments and agencies about the federal freeze or temporary pause of agency grants. I just want to read this because it's for every political scientist, for everyone who's studying government, to all the college students, the grad students. If for no other reason, read it and analyze it through the lens of democracy and what we know about government, right? I just want to read, and I quote, "The American people elected Donald J. Trump to be president of the United States." Listen to this. and gave him a mandate to increase the impact of every federal taxpayer dollar. Career and political appointees in the executive branch have a duty to align federal spending and action, I have it highlighted, with the will of the American people as expressed through presidential priorities. The will of the American people as expressed through presidential priorities. I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm just telling you to think. You know, that struck me as different than some of the things I remember learning about in school and hearing about at home. And I thought we had representatives who represented our needs and gave rise to our voice. So it's the will of the American people as expressed through the vote of the American people is what I think you should say, or through the voice of the American people, or through the voice of our elected officials, but not the presidential priorities. I don't know that can personally, I think this is interesting. Worded, because then it goes on to identify those presidential priorities as sort of this unleashing of American energy. I'm sorry, the ending of wokeness and the weaponization of government. I'm not sure that I remember that being the will of the American people. But again, not telling what to think, just telling everybody, let's think and let's ask questions of this, because it has huge implications in the ways we've been talking about. Anybody else on that one? Because I want to get to this other one. This is about
just thinking about just thinking about the presidential policies. I mean, if it's supposed to represent the people, the majority of the people here are working class or middle class. How can he have priority for us? He doesn't relate to us. You know, he was born in a wealthy situation. We're not born in wealthy situations. I'm a first-gen low-income student. You know, how can he relate to us? How can he create priorities for people that looks like us, that pay taxes, as Dr. Chester said, but his policies have everything to do with tearing us down? Yeah. So we have to start thinking about, you know, are we supposed to rely on his priorities, or do we create our own? I mean, the thing is, we're looking for somebody to follow or to create this and create that. Sounds great. If the people want something different, you know, they will make it happen. I mean, it's just like the saying, if you're not changing it, you're choosing it. So what are we really doing? Are we trying to change it? We're talking about it, but are we willing to change it? Or, you know what, is a week later that passed and we still choosing it? You know, the people need to stand up for their own dollars. If you're giving up your dollars, you know it's coming out of your check, you need to start standing up for your dollars, you know, or you pat and bend. And that's just what's going to happen.
Yeah, I definitely think giving voice to the people and our, you know, concerns, our worries, our anxieties. You know, I spoke to some folks earlier, and all of them were, you know, looking for like practical things they could do. Look, call your elected officials, write your elected officials. All the folks who are on social media, let's use these platforms to raise consciousness and to get the attention of our elected officials, not just to get their attention, but to tell them, you know, your stance on this. You know, I am concerned about this particular one because, you know, it impacts so much of the enterprise of higher education in which I work. You know, it's not just me. I know that there are early and pre-tenure colleagues of mine across the country whose research would be stalled. I'm not just talking about social scientists and education, although I am. I'm also talking about the folks who are studying and working on cures to cancer and some of our, you know, most pressing public health problems and diseases. That research would be paused, stopped. Some of these are living biological labs, so the cell cultures will die. And that devastates a person's research program. And of course, many of them are trying to, you know, do research to you know, get tenure and promotion, and that will impact their own productivity and their own success. And I cannot, say this enough. Like, I reached out to several of my students, hopefully for one of these podcast shows. Most of them are done and finished their degree, their professors' places. But as a professor, I had federal grants from the National Science Foundation, from the U.S. Department of Education, that funded their doctoral education.
Yep.
That would not have been possible if a pause happened. And how do you pause in the middle of a semester? Because what are they supposed to do? How do they pay their tuition and they get their stipend in the middle? I mean, there's so many compounding effects and problems of this, but there's yet another executive order, and feel free to bring us back to this memo, but Executive Order 14151. Jaquin, do you have that link that you could drop in the chat for folks? But this one's called Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferences. Man, I'm tempted to read the whole thing, but I won't. I'll just tell you what the beginning sort of starts. It says, these are the words of the executive order. The Biden administration forced illegal and immoral discrimination programs going by the name Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, into virtually all aspects of the federal government, in areas ranging from airline safety to the military. This was a concerted effort stemming from President Biden's first day in office, when in his executive order, he sort of forced, equity action plans and woke ideologies down the throats of Americans. Now, of course, that's not my opinion of how this happens, but what this particular executive order says, and I quote, "This all ends today. This ends today. Americans deserve a government committed to serving every person with equal dignity and respect, and expending precious taxpayer resources only to make America great again." So what this does is it ceases any federal, programs, initiatives that go by the name of diversity, equity, inclusion, any of the mandates, policies, preferences. It bans chief diversity officers, equity action plans, initiatives, grants, contracts. And it also, to Dr. Chester's point earlier, I just want to close with this. It also calls out that not only are they to stop these programs immediately, right? Programs, initiatives, preferences, policies, all of that. But they need to take an assessment on whether there are agencies that have misleadingly relabeled some of these in an attempt to preserve their function. And it goes all the way down to some of the training and the DEI materials that you were talking about, Steve. So, I mean, again, very far-reaching, serious sort of impacts. We've already seen, I have colleagues and friends and frat brothers, quite frankly, who are no longer employed because they were in chief diversity officer roles at public institutions. Folks who teach in programs that were gender studies, women's studies, Black studies, whose programs have already been either reduced, removed, or have been threatened. Huge sort of impacts here. Now, this executive order is not being stayed. It is not being paused. This one is still in effect. And so let's talk about it. Jaquin, did you have anything you want to say?
No, I want to get to the panelists. I mean, the speakers, the guests, to kind of hear what your thoughts are. I know we talked about this several times over the past week. So,
I mean, let's just be honest. What do those three letters say to those individuals that are trying to get those things stopped? No, we can't have any minority or Black programs. We can't have any minority or Black farmers. We can't have any minority or Black kids going to college, so on and so forth, right? They haven't even thought about, people that are a certain age. That's diversity, disability, how someone thinks. I mean, these are things that when I'm training my mentors to be able to be around students from different backgrounds, we talk about diversity. We talk about diversity from the campus, the city. We talk about diversity, within the faculty and staff. Those are things that we have to talk about. But the problem is we have a tunnel vision idea of what diversity is. And it's so much more, but they're going to go ahead, continue to drive that nail in the wood until they get people to think like it just means race. It just means race. No, that's not what it just means. It's a lot of different things. I mean, I just mentioned a second ago, we haven't even talked about farmers who are just having to take all these crops and just throw them away, throw them in ditches, and hopefully, they can regrow something or sell them for cheap. You know, like you said, all these programs are being affected because they don't want people that look like you and me to rise or to be at a certain level unless you have their permission.
And it's not just happening on the school levels, at your institutions,
Hmm.
corporations. I
Yeah,
mean, look at what Target just did. They had a whole DEI initiative. Oh, we're gonna help black brands, and they've decided what they're doing away with that
yeah.
initiative. I mean, you're talking about Black History Month. They're trying to. I mean, it's when I say it's so.
Ooh,
It's
I
just.
got something to add to this.
Hmm.
I ooh, this is something that I said to one of my coworkers, and I said to him, "Man, we ought to do a Black History Challenge." He said, "What is that?" I said, "We ought to have people sign up, and for a week you can't use any Black inventions or any variations of, and they have to do it for a week." Do you know how many people, how hard that will be to literally have to wake up in the morning and say, well, I can't put my cotton robe like I usually do because guess what? The cotton gin and it taught how to process cotton. So guess what? Any variation of that, can't use that. Well, I can't use the doorknob either. I'm hungry. I want some chips. Can't eat that either. I can't drive anywhere because I have an automatic, and Richard T. Spikes invented the automatic, so I guess I can't drive my car. These are things that people don't think about because they want to say, well, we didn't do anything. We didn't build this. You couldn't live without us.
I guess my problem with this Black History thing is they're the one like it's what's so funny to me is that race exists because of a white
Yeah,
supremacist structure. And then now you're saying, well, why are you always focusing on race? We didn't focus on race, you did. You decide to delineate black, white, etc., and then
hmm,
want to take pride in the black, etc. Now there's an issue with race. And so teaching black history is simply teaching history.
right,
There's no one else that you're trying to erase from historical data other than
right,
African Americans. I mean, we don't have to say it's black. All we have to do is say it's American history because it
right,
is in fact factual. It's factual data. So that part just escapes me of the common sense piece of it. Like, how can I lose my job for teaching something that is factual and actual when for decades you've had me teach lies? You've had me you said before. So it's just to your point, like if we just take away all of these inventions that were created by African Americans, I mean, again, it's a part of history. It's not black.
hmm,
And so we fall for the banana in the tailpipe. We have to be conscious of the conversation that we argue with them on. Whole black
yeah,
history is important. Okay, fine, let's do away with black history. But would you admit that it's still history? That is
right,
historically accurate and factual, that he just happens to be a black man. We don't have to mention his race. We can just have his picture in the book.
right,
It's just the way in which they play these games. It's offensive. Like I said, when you're telling me about wasteful spending and it's my dollars, it's
right,
my dollars. You tax me through income tax, then I have to file taxes, and I pay more money on the money I already paid you for the money that I earned. And
Yeah.
you're telling me that spending it back into my
yeah,
most vulnerable neighborhoods and communities and demographics and people is wasteful.
yeah,
Yeah.
Just I'm just confused.
We have two things we could say there. So I want to offer something else to the conversation about Black History Month that we heard today. Jaquin and I witnessed it. We put it on our social media to the folks who are listening and watching. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being here. Stay tuned. Like, share. thank you for folks in the chat, but I also want to call out something that happened in the chat. Thank you, Dr. Chester, for tuning or weighing in on that. But one of our, someone asked, like, why are we talking about this when, it's sort of hypothetical? And I appreciate the comment, and I appreciate the question. I do think it deserves some of our, so us to talk about it. Here's what I would say as a co-host of this particular podcast is this is not just a hypothetical. I mean, I think what makes it feel like a hypothetical is that we have now a judge who has temporarily halted the implementation of this executive order. And gives, it just sort of stays it for about 5-6 days. Okay. So then what that means is we've got to try to anticipate what will happen between now and then. And I think there are a lot of things that I'm watching a lot of our political experts, legal experts, and judicial experts sort of predict. And that is that given the sway of the court, given the majority of the court, it is likely that this will at least be implemented, and then we'll leave it open. If you read the executive orders, that's why we put the links in the chat. Toward the end, they basically say, look, we know you're going to try to, challenge these executive orders legally. So if you do it, and one part of it is found sort of beyond the law, all the rest still holds. So you'd have to break these executive orders up into multiple parts in order to really unravel them. So I think having a conversation to raise consciousness and awareness and get people engaged is what we do. I think that's what, that is the good work to me. But the second is, I think the fact that the order was issued at all is a wake-up call, should be a wake-up call and a warning. That vital programs like Head Start and housing assistance and rental assistance and free and reduced lunch and breakfast and community grants can ever come under attack. To me, if we don't stay informed and mobilize, then the next attempt may succeed. So, fingers crossed and toes crossed that this doesn't happen. And then we have great conversations. We reach out to our elected officials. We, mobilize our base and we prevail. But I mean, if the first week is any indication of what is to come, we've got 4 years to, prepare for these kinds of actions that really impact families. They devastate schools, they disrupt communities, and they, sort of push back against so much of the progress that we have made as a democratic society. So I think, these are not just political debates. It's not just hearsay. It certainly is not just this. The purpose of this episode was not hypotheticals, but it's really to just bring folks to consciousness and to help us understand if we don't pay attention and push back, stay aware, think about it, strategize, be thinking these critical resources could be slashed permanently. Anyone else?
But you got to also think about this. This is locker room talk for them. When I get back in office, I'm going to do this. This is locker room talk for them while, they're thinking about how to arrange the chessboard. And we're just like, okay, where's the chessboard?
To Dr. Terrell's point, listen, having this is called being proactive. It's called not being reactive, but being proactive. And
being proactive.
Too often is that we're reacting to things as opposed to being proactive. And so, let's be proactive about what does this mean if this happens? How are we going to respond to that? So it's so much deeper than a hypothetical. It really is the implementation of being proactive as opposed to reactive.
I mean, my thing is, let's look at it like this. Okay, if you want to talk about where our tax dollars are going, well, technically the government's like a company, right? So at any point in time, we should be able to audit it as well. So where are you taking our tax dollars?
I think, I appreciate the question as well. I also don't think it's a hypothetical. One, I don't believe we have the privilege or luxury to wait until it passes. These are impacting real people, humans who breathe air, who eat food just like us. These are not robots. The executive order before it was halted by a judge, thankfully gives us a little bit more time to think about it, but was released last night. and then what gives us 6-7 hours to navigate what was released. So the people that we serve, it's important for us to get out in front, as Dr. Chester said, and be proactive and have these discussions, because at the end of the day, it's impacting the people that we care about the most. So although some of the world who does not look like me has the privilege to cross their arms and lean back and laugh, I personally cannot do that.
No, because even those who are Trump voters are now sitting back saying, hold on, why am I being affected? Because you didn't see the forest through the trees. You walked around with the face of a sphinx. Like Dr. Chester said, you cut off your nose to spite your face because you didn't see what was going to happen. You didn't know how it was going to affect you. They already knew this. Like I said, it's locker room talk. So what you need to think about is, and this is the one thing, I do with my fraternity: voter registration, education, and mobilization. You have to educate yourself on the people that you vote for. It's not just about party. I can give an example. In Tennessee, Diane Harshbarger is a huge TRIO advocate. She speaks very highly as first-generation students. She's a first-generation student. Guess what? She talks to us all the time. We may not agree about certain things, but we agree about TRIO and the fact that these first-gen low-income students with disabilities need the resources and need the shots to be successful. We just have to stop thinking about party and start thinking about how it benefits your organizations in your daily life. Because we don't agree on certain things, it's okay. We can agree to disagree. I can shake your hand and still won't think you're a terrible person. We have to start thinking about things from a proactive standpoint. If I know I work for TRIO, I know she's a TRIO advocate, let's work together. Let's figure this out. How can we help each other? Those are things that we need to do. We may not want to, we may not want to, she follows Trump.
It has to be beyond party.
We gotta get beyond politics. We have to start thinking about our everyday life. And my everyday life is first generation low income students with disabilities. And guess what? She's an advocate for it. So I'm gonna make sure she continues to advocate for us in our program in the state of Tennessee. And hopefully she can convince others to do the same. Because
we were talking about this today, building what you're saying, Steve, we were talking about this today, that, we really have to, which is why, again, I'm saying we're not dictating what people should think. One, we're just hoping that we're calling all people to be thinking. But, people often, the news is preoccupied in some sense with the 47th president right now, Dr. Donald Trump. And there's a lot of Trump. We were intentional, even in our flyer for this episode, that we did not foreground Trump. Because I think the problem with keeping your eyes focused on a single person or a single point is you miss everything else that's happening around you.
You missed the bus.
The memo today was signed by Matthew Vaeth, who is the acting director of OMB. So, and during the press conference, the press secretary said his line is open. He has his line open. He's accepting calls from anybody who wants clarity on this memo. If you are running a federal program, I'd be calling his office to figure out, hey, how does this impact me? How can I be sure to make sure that my services, these critical services, still get in the hands of single moms, single dads, low-income families, those who are living with disabilities, and anchored within those communities are those who live at the intersection of multiple identities. Like I was looking today, just curious about the number of grants coming out of NIH, the National Institutes of Health, as well as SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Association. How many of those grants went to support suicide hotline and suicide prevention programs.
Mhm.
There are hundreds. But if you open them up, many of these programs are designed to or have sort of extra effort and intentionality to reach out to communities of color, low income communities, LGBTQIA plus communities. I mean, lots of folks who a single mention of some of these groups,
But let's
especially,
dig.
They're defunded means that
Yeah,
their funding has to be taken away because that's DEI.
you
yeah.
see,
DEI.
But let's dig deeper, right? Let's go back to the education point. A lot of people don't know that, to people they vote for in Congress, House senators, state senators, their voting record is public. You should be able to see how these people vote versus what they say. This is showing you what they do.
Hmm.
A lot of people don't know that voting records are public. You can see how the person that you think that you want to represent you and the people around you, how they vote. That should be able to tell you exactly how they would impact your life as an individual from a city standpoint, from a state standpoint, and from a large governmental standpoint. If they're not educating themselves on the candidates, then what you're saying is, I am choosing to follow this because everybody around me is doing the same.
Mhm.
Guess what? What you're saying is, I'm just going to be a sheep and I'm going to follow the flock. Instead of you saying, well, who's best for me? Let me figure out if this person votes in the way that I think is best for me and my family, and then me and my friends, and then me and my neighbors. And then if so, then that should be the person you vote for, and then you should continue to hold them accountable, feet to the fire. If not, what you're not changing, you're choosing.
I think that's so true that we must be mindful of who we vote into these offices. And to kind of turn it back to DEI, I think, let's just get past the diversity. People, if you want to say that it's about only race, cool. You know what? I give you that tonight, not tomorrow, but tonight for the sake of conversation, I give it to you. But I do believe that equity and inclusion transcends race and ethnicity, because equity is about fairness and justice and access, opportunity and resources, recognizing that different people have different needs. It's different from equality. Equality is one size fits all. Everyone gets the same. But
Right.
Equity is everyone starts at a different starting point. There are some students who need counseling and tutoring. There's others who just need counseling. There are some people who need counseling, tutoring, financial aid, SSS, and so much more, just to have comparable outcomes.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't understand how DEI is a black thing or wokeness.
When the majority of people that benefit from DEI is women, and it's white women. So how does DEI really mean black? When you look at all statistics, all records, when you look at it, it is white female who has benefited most from these types of initiatives.
Absolutely, I think you're right. Research is very clear. I think we did a literature review on DEI or diversity 2 or 3 years ago, and literally in every lit review or all the literature kept saying that the group that benefits the most are white people. I mean, at some point, can we call us America? I know we are mean. I know we are hateful. I know we think about ourselves and nobody else, but can we call a spade sometime before the good Lord calls me? I think we have to do a better job. When we talk about the students, it's impacting, white people too.
Yeah.
Who come from a low income, who are foster youth, who have housing insecurity. You are impacted by DEI being removed. Let me tell you something, because Steve can say it, Dr. Chester, I'm sure you can share it. Terrell has written about it, that, these DEI spaces welcomes white people. It's not like
Yeah.
we just shut the door and say you can't come in because you don't look like us. No, it's you've always had access.
It's the reason why
So,
they're part of being founders of the NAACP.
so my question has always been, and I've been dumbfounded since I've asked, what's the issue?
Ooh, you don't do. Mm-mm.
I mean, I think when I think about all of this, sorry, I was trying to get this thing because I forgot I have screen sharing privileges. So since Jaquin went there, and I'm thinking about, like, listen, how many times do we get to have not this particular conversation? This conversation is unique because it was activated in sort of events through these executive orders, and they're coming out lightning fast. Every day you wake up and there's something. But we have had opportunities to come together. Dr. Chester has a podcast or episode with Black Educators Rock. She has the conference. We were talking with Steve about a project this summer. Jaquin and I have an episode every Saturday of the podcast. So, and there are lots of you who likely come together and have these conversations, but there are people tuning in who this might be your first time sort of thinking about the difference between equity and equality. And so I'm going to share something that I typically use in my public lectures that Jaquin just mentioned. I think it's a good representation of these issues. And I'm sure you all have seen it before. Hopefully it shows the way I want it to. And just let me know if that comes up or you can see it. Okay, so for folks who are tuning in, this is an illustration demonstrating the difference between equality and equity. And the executive orders and the memos that have come out this week have replaced the term equity, diversity, inclusion with a double downing on equality and meritocracy, or a merit-based kind of society. And so, as shown in the illustration, on the left side of the screen is a sort of scenario of equality. It's when you give everybody the same thing, the same kind of support, the same kind of assistance, federal assistance, since we're talking about that tonight, right? And what that does is for the families, for the communities that are already advantaged, like the illustrated or represented by the person in the blue shirt, it gives them something to stand on. That gives them a head start and a leverage over other people. It does support those who have adequate resources to pay their rent, to buy eggs, given that they're $20 or something like that now. I'm vegan, so I wouldn't know, but they're very expensive, I hear. But we give support to those who have adequate resources, represented by the person in the red, and they can sort of barely see over the barrier but still have a little bit of struggle. But to the disadvantaged, the vulnerable, those without resources, those who were left behind, and the fun-sized people that I like to talk about in the purple shirt, it's not enough, because there's still barriers between them and their participation in democracy, their participation in society. So what we need is more, and we've been working, toward this over the years. The work that we've done, the goal of diversity, equity, inclusion, and sometimes even belonging initiatives, programs, policies, officers, was to then take into account who people are and what communities need, and then to use that information to provide the support that they need, recognizing that everybody doesn't need the same kind of support, everyone doesn't need the same amount of support, and everyone doesn't need the same dosage of it, but that we could then, through our government agencies, offer support, suicide prevention, and mental health support, and student aid, and counseling, and tutoring, and Head Start, and free and reduced lunch, and rental assistance, whatever it might be. And now you can see even those who had the least at first are raising their hands in victory because they're able to participate in democracy. They're able to succeed in school. They're able to get the job. They're able to be promoted. Now, before I close, we got to appreciate the fact that there's still a wall in both scenarios that gets in the way of full participation. Those things are process walls. We do need more efficient systems. There certainly are rising costs and all sorts of physical structures and other kinds of inequitable practices. There has been a glass ceiling for women and moving up into seats of leadership. We were working on these things. And here's the reality. I think this one captures it best. And then I'd love to hear from our panelists about what your thoughts are about some of this. But to those who haven't seen this before, I think this is a good visualization of it. The reality of the world is this: we are giving a lot of support to people who don't need it,
We don't need it.
while we're still denying assistance and support from those who need it the most.
Yeah.
And we haven't even begun to really tear down the wall. We were talking about building more walls, but we haven't even begun really tearing down the wall and liberating people for full participation in democracy. So let me stop there and just say to our panelists, any reactions, thoughts, comments?
No, I think a picture says 1,000 words. I think it's been said. I think people should look at it and digest it, and this is what we should let them. It resounds. It needs no further comment.
And to accept
Steve?
reality. That's the biggest thing. Accept the reality. You may not want to, because my thing is it highlights an issue, and then you have to realize that you're the issue. You have to accept the reality. Sometimes you could be the problem, not know it. Be humble enough to be able to say, it's me. How can we fix it? I need help. And that's how you grow.
Jaquin?
Yeah, I mean, we did. I have to look it up, but off the top of my head, every Tuesday we post Tuesday's term on all Do Good Work platforms, and this week it was allyship, and basically these are groups who are part of the majority, and they actively participate and find ways to advocate and support the least fortunate. And I think it is important for people who are in the majority group, stand up, speak out about the issues that we're seeing today, understanding that they are unjust, they're unfair, they're inequitable, and the list goes on and on. But Terrell always tells me to keep it to at least 3. You don't go 5, 6, 7. And it's happened before. And during the civil rights movement, whites and other people in the majority group stood up for what was right. It's not that hard. It's not hard. I mean, these are people who are, in bad situations, and the government, out of all people, my God, out of all people, are, stepping over them rather than picking them up and helping them get through some of the most troubling times. We have someone in the office who has, first of all, from my understanding, if you are a criminal, you can't vote.
But here in Florida.
But we are sending people who are illegals and who have criminal records back to their country.
And into the
But we have one in the Oval Office. Make that make sense, because I know for a fact that was Barack Obama, my man would never be there. So second thing is, I want to talk about inclusion. I think inclusion is often misunderstood as a physical space or a set of policies. But at its core, inclusion is a feeling that, you can be invited to a space, invited to campus, invited to the church. But if it's not warm and welcoming, inviting, supportive, inclusion is not present. And I think that through these executive orders, it tells so many people, particularly I know if we get to it, the LGBTQ plus community, that they're not thought of or welcomed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's problematic in so many ways, because when you don't feel a sense of belonging, or you don't feel that you matter to others, anxiety goes up, depression, stress, and at worst, suicidal ideation. So I think we're going to see an uptick in some of these groups as well, and we must be mindful about what, even if we don't have the federal dollars, if we don't have the resources, what can we do as fellow Americans and neighbors to support these groups?
put our resources together. I mean, my grandparents, my mother's parents are 99 and 95. And the one thing they know how to do is live off the land. You know, why not put our resources together? We talked about the farming thing earlier. You know, I saw something where there was a website where you can locate certain farms that you can buy food from. Or guess what? Who said you had to go to the grocery store? My grandmother didn't go to the grocery store. She had a garden out back, a grapevine, a blueberry vine, and grandpa will hunt for food, or he would go to a butcher and buy what he wanted. You know, why can't we help each other in that aspect? Okay, you got a farm over here. Okay, we got vegetables over here. Okay, you got cows. Okay, and then you got chickens over here. Okay, I got resources too. Let's work with each other. We should be able to do that as people.
Now, Stephen, that's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole thing we got to unpack. Now, you stop that. You know why we can't, but that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother podcast.
Hey, I'm gonna keep my faith. I'm gonna keep my
We
faith.
gonna keep the faith, but we got to unpack it. I'm saying, that's gonna be a whole lot of unpacking.
Hey, you
why
know
it
what?
is.
There's a
I'll
lot
come
of
up and say that why we can't is this reason. And I said all the time on every platform I'm on, Stephen, is because if it ultimately goes into self-love. It's
Mhm.
truly about loving oneself. Because if I love me, there is no way that I'm not going to support everything that looks like me and that is reflective of me. But it
Mhm.
first begins with me loving myself. And we as a people don't understand the unconscious bias we have against each other because we don't understand how deeply ingrained white supremacy is in us. We don't love us. We don't. So that's a whole nother conversation though. I know we're probably gonna be ending soon and we were having that DE and I conversation. And I know you guys probably have heard this one before, but this is the one that's like really, really a great analogy for me. It says diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance.
Accidents.
And equity is allowing you to choose the music.
Mhm.
Right? Because many of us have been to spaces where we like Jaquan was saying earlier, we're in there, but do we really feel welcome? Do you really feel like you're included? Okay, yeah, you were invited to the dance. Okay, now they're saying come dance, but they haven't played anything that you identify with.
Right.
Now they're also allowing you to choose some of the songs at the dance. That's
Yeah.
equity. And so I've always been very, very fond of that analogy of
Yep.
DEI. And all
Yeah.
three are needed, right?
Yeah.
They're just needed. And again, they're not just about race. They're about so many other characteristics as we've talked about tonight.
Yeah. And equality, of course, then is everybody has to have the same music, which if you try to hold that up against and with in tandem with our democracy, which stands on freedom and liberty and justice and rights. Like if you don't like the music, you should have the right to change it.
Mhm.
But to insist that everyone must have the same, be evaluated the same, and it's just these are really important conversations, and I see folks saying they loved it. So thank you. Listen, we are about to come up on time, so I want to make sure we get time to do this. Just questions that we've had earlier. So, what are some ways that people who are listening to tonight's episode can get involved, can support the cause, or can even support groups that you're affiliated with? I've heard, organizations like Black Educators Rock, fraternities and sororities mentioned. So if you could just share to our panelists, and then Jaquin and I can also do this, some ways that actionable, practical ways that people can get involved to support the cause, to champion their voice. And we'll start with you, Steve.
I know for me working in student support services, one thing that we can do is we can get our kids that we service to reach out to our um, local and state politicians, those who advocate for TRIO programs, and say, hey, this is what we're dealing with. Here's the downfall and the shortfalls we're having right now because of a funding freeze. What can we do to get off that list? And what can we do to be able to continue to do the good work of what TRIO has done, for all of schools that have TRIO programs, even pre-college. Some people may not have thought about going to college, but Upward Bound, Educational Talent Search, they made that possible. And we have to get the share on college campuses. We have to get the shareholders. Who are our shareholders? They're our students, because without our students, we do not have jobs. We have to get them to do the hard work, and we have to get them to even, get our faculty to support them so that they can have support. And even if that means I have to go to the president, I have to go to the board. Guess what we need to do? Because we are powerful, more powerful than even the president on campus as students, because guess what? Without us, there is no president on campus. There are no faculty and staff. We have to get students, we have to start empowering our students to be who they are. We want them to be better people, and we want to feel like we're controlling their growth. No, these kids are ready to grow up. We just have to give them support that they need and let them be the power players that they need to be so that they can be more powerful. Because my goal is simply to say this: I want every kid to be better than me. And if you're not presenting yourself every day and doing the best you can the 24 hours you get for that kid to be better than you later on, you're not doing your job.
Put that in the chat, folks. You heard it here first. Dr. Chester?
Just want to say I am a product of Upward Bound and the TRIO programs. I am Dr. Melissa Chester because of those very programs. And so I truly am a proponent and believer of those programs. You want to start just being more intentional about everything that you support, that you purchase, that you do. Become educated. You can't continue to be reactive. You have to be proactive and go out and look at things on your own. I would say download the app Goods Unite Us. I mean, it is a phenomenal app. Goods Unite Us, GOODS Unite Us. It, like to your point, it has every company you can think of and their party affiliation and what they support. And it is a phenomenal app. So use it and support those that support you. Support those that believe in you and your existence. And so the Goods Unite Us app is a great way that you can make small steps and actionable things that you can do. And again, be more proactive. Start reading, start educating. And as Stephen said, contact your local officials. You don't have to know it all. You don't have to speak, legalese or speak a fit. You just tell them, hey, how does this impact me? I am your constituent that lives in this area. This is the program that has benefited me. How is this going to impact me? Because the more calls they get from those parties who are impacted by this, the more that's going to matter. And so we can't just sit back and continue to be reactive.
You heard it here. Good United app and support local businesses. Jaquin.
Man, those are all good points. I had to kind of go through my laundry list of other things to talk about. But one, I think if it's in your heart and something that you want to do and you have the skills and the knowledge, that run for school board. Because, we need representation and a voice on there that truly believes in our students and understands where they come from and what they need to be successful. Also go to the school board sessions when they convene to understand what's going on, what's being implemented, what's being talked about. And then if you have an opportunity to speak on the floor, take that time to do that because your voice really does matter. No matter, regardless what anyone says, your voice matters. Your voice is powerful. And the last thing I would like to say is that we must, as a country, embrace difficult conversations. In order to move the needle forward, we have to engage in conversations that are uncomfortable for us, regardless of if it, from race to federal funding. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have these conversations, we're going to still either be stagnant or go backwards. And someone I love dearly, although she doesn't know me, but I know her, is we're not going back. And in order for us to not go back, we must, put them out and talk about them.
All right. So before we go, listen to everyone. These are very concrete ways that you can get involved and support the cause. And you've got lots of representation for civic organizations, fraternities, and sororities that are doing lots of good work. Connect with those agencies, stay informed. There's lots of mixed information out there. So try to follow reputable news sources and advocacy groups that are tracking the issues. Share what you learned. You know, usually when people go to places like Vegas, they say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But what happens on this episode and what you learn in episodes like this, don't stay here. Share them, take them with them, share them out. Talk about it tomorrow at work. Talk about it in your community groups and even in the family group chat. Use your voice. Write letters to the editor, call, email, meet with your representatives at the local, state, and federal levels. That if you feel the way, demand that they oppose these harmful policies. It is time now that we can denounce the mere presentation of a harmful policy, executive order, or any other action that threatens critical assistance that we need. You heard some of the platforms we could use. You could also find ways to support organizations that are out there on the front line, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Education Trust. There are lots of groups that are out there doing this work. Just know this, that when leaders ban DEI and they freeze federal aid, especially federal assistance to the kinds of programs we talked about tonight, they send a very clear message that some people simply don't belong. These policies hurt students, they hurt families, and they threaten to hurt entire communities by stripping them of the resources and opportunities that they need to thrive, to flourish, to live, to exist. I was on LinkedIn today and saw a woman who was able to talk about the fact that if this were to stay, she's a woman living with cancer, that she sees this policy as a death threat. That sense of belonging, I often say in my writing, is a feeling, but I want to stop saying that it's just that. It's not just that. It is a feeling, but it's a feeling that it can't be forced, but it can be shaped by policy. And when DEI is banned and assistance is frozen, marginalized communities lose access, support, and dignity and respect. And that these sort of movements, whether they are memos, executive orders, whether they're stayed for a few days or enacted, they serve as barriers. And when we roll back these sort of the progress we've made, it only deepens disparities and gaps that once existed. And it tells Black and brown and disabled and low income, no income people, you're on your own. You do not belong here. But tonight's episode is to remind us that as we close, to every single person in our listening audience, those who will watch the live later, those who are in this room, those who are in the chat, we have a message for you. You do belong here. And you do matter. And you are enough. No matter what any side may say, united, we stand, and divided, we fall. We hope we will all link arms across aisles, across nations, across difference, and stand together and do good work. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we look forward to having you at a future episode. Help us thank our audience and also, most importantly, our special guest. Thank you, Dr. Chester, and thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you for tuning in to Do Good Work Podcast. We hope you found today's conversation informative, uplifting, and insightful. Don't forget to like and share this episode with your networks. Follow us on social media at Do Good Work on X, formerly Twitter, for real-time updates, behind-the-scenes content, and so much more. Until next time, friends, don't be afraid to do something, but do something good. Do good work.